Isaiah 42, beginning in verse 1, it says, Behold my servant, whom I uphold, mine elect, in whom my soul delighteth. I have put my spirit upon him, he shall bring forth judgment to the Gentiles. He shall not cry, nor lift up, nor cause his voice to be heard in the street. A bruised reed shall he not break, and the smoking flax shall he not quench. He shall bring forth judgment unto truth. He shall not fail nor be discouraged till he has set judgment in the earth, and the isles shall wait for his law. Thus saith the Lord, He that created the heavens, and stretched them out, he that spread forth the earth, and that which cometh out of it, he that giveth breath unto the people upon it, and spirit to them that walk therein. I, the Lord, have called thee in righteousness, and will hold thine hand, and will keep thee, and give thee for a covenant of the people, for a light of the Gentiles, to open the blind eyes, to bring out the prisoners from the prison, and them that sit in darkness out of the prison house. I am the Lord, that is my name, and my glory will I not give to another, neither my praise to graven images. Behold, the former things are come to pass, and new things do I declare. Before they spring forth, I tell you of them. Sing unto the Lord a new song, and his praise from the end of the earth, that ye go down to the sea, and all that is therein, the isles and the inhabitants thereof. Let the wilderness and the cities thereof lift their voice, the villages that Kedar doth inhabit. Let the inhabitants of the rocks sing, let them shout from the top of the mountains. Let them give glory unto the Lord, and declare his praise in the islands. The Lord shall go forth as a mighty man. He shall stir up jealousy like a man of war. He shall cry, yea, roar. He shall prevail against his enemies. I have long time holden my peace. I have been still and refrained myself. Now will I cry like a travailing woman. I will destroy and devour at once. I will make waste mountains and hills, and dry up all their herbs, and I will make the rivers islands, and I will dry up the pools, and I will bring the blind by a way that they knew not. I will lead them in paths that they have not known. I will make darkness light before them, and crooked things straight. These things will I do unto them, and not forsake them. They shall be turned back, they shall be greatly ashamed that trust in graven images, that say to the molten images, Ye are our gods. Hear, ye deaf, and look, ye blind, that ye may see. Who is blind but my servant, or deaf as my messenger that I sent? Who is blind as he that is perfect, and blind as the Lord's servant? Seeing many things, but thou observest not, opening the ears, but he heareth not. The Lord is well pleased for his righteousness' sake. He will magnify the law and make it honorable. But this is a people robbed and spoiled. They are all of them snared in holes, and they are hid in prison houses. They are for a prey, and none delivereth, for a spoil, and none saith, Restore. Who among you will give ear to this? Who will hearken and hear for the time to come? Who gave Jacob for a spoil, and Israel to the robbers? Did not the Lord, he against whom we have sinned? For they would not walk in his ways, neither were they obedient unto his law. Therefore he hath poured upon him the fury of his anger, and the strength of battle, and it hath set him on fire round about, yet he knew not, and it burned him, yet he laid it not to heart. So, we ended chapter 41 with a discussion of idols, and how, God is over everything and everyone in the universe. He created the universe. He is outside of it and in it, and he is above it. And there is no idol, there is no created being, whether you're talking about an actual powerful created being like Satan or any of his angels, or whether you're talking about Michael the Archangel. No matter who you're talking about, whether you're talking about a human being, whether you're talking about an animal, whether you're talking about the burning sun itself, you will not find power that equals God's. So, verse 29 of chapter 41 says, Behold, they are all vanity, their works are nothing, their molten images are wind and confusion. And when you compare an idol, or even one of these beings that really exist, that do have power, that are evil, when you compare them to God, they're nothing but wind and confusion, regardless of whether you're talking about the molten or the graven image, the piece of rock or wood or whatever you're talking about, or whether you're talking about maybe some of those, I believe, represent real beings that have existed and do exist, these evil spiritual beings that are under Satan's control. They don't have anything on God. There is no comparison. So we see here now in verse 1 of chapter 42, "Behold my servant, whom I uphold, mine elect, in whom my soul delighteth. I have put my spirit upon him. He shall bring forth judgment to the Gentiles." Now, there is a lot of scholarly debate on the identity of this servant here in verse 1. I think when you look at this verse and you compare it to the scriptures that we're about to read, there should be no debate, scholarly or otherwise, as to who this servant is. I will tell you that the debate is between the idea that this servant here is either the nation of Israel, or some people believe that it is Jesus himself. As we go through, I think you'll see which one I believe is clearly the answer, and which one I believe is clearly not the answer. So, one thing, when we talk about God's servant, it says, "Behold my servant, whom I uphold." In the book of Isaiah alone, there are multiple people who are referenced as God's servant. Just a quick example, a couple quick examples. If you go to Isaiah 22:20, we won't read it this morning, you can see that Eliakim, son of Hilkiah, is referenced as God's servant. If you look at Isaiah 37:35, you can see he calls David his servant. In fact, you can see that Israel is referenced as a servant in the previous chapter that we read before this, in the next chapter, chapter 43, and in chapter 41, and in chapter 45, and in chapter 48. So I can see why some people might get confused if they're not reading the whole Bible, if they're just looking here at the book of Isaiah itself, and specifically the surrounding chapters. I want to look at Isaiah, or we'll go to Zechariah chapter 3, verse 8. And then we'll be going back to Isaiah chapter 53, verse 11. We're first going to look at Zechariah chapter 3, and then we'll be going back to Isaiah chapter 53. So while you're turning to Zechariah, if you want to put a finger there on Isaiah chapter 53. Zechariah chapter 3, verse 8. It says, "Hear now, O Joshua the high priest, thou and thy fellows that sit before thee, for they are men wondered at, for behold, I will bring forth my servant, the branch." Now, on back to Isaiah chapter 53, verse 11. Isaiah 53:11. And we'll also read verse 10 along with this. It says, starting in Isaiah chapter 53, verse 10, "Yet it pleased the Lord to bruise him. He hath put him to grief. When thou shalt make his soul an offering for sin, he shall see his seed, he shall prolong his days, and the pleasure of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. He shall see of the travail of his soul, and shall be satisfied. By his knowledge shall my righteous servant justify many, for he shall bear their iniquities." Isaiah chapter 53, famously a description of Jesus' first coming, a brief description of his suffering and the work that he is to do as the Messiah, as the Savior not only of the nation of Israel, but of the whole world at his first coming. And so here we see Jesus in Zechariah chapter 3, verse 8, he's referred to as my servant, the branch. And then we see in Isaiah chapter 53, the one who is bruised says, "By his knowledge shall my righteous servant," so not only is he a servant, he's a righteous servant, "shall justify many, for he shall bear their iniquities." Now, we'll look at Mark 10. Mark 10. And we'll look at verse 45 here. Mark 10:45. It says, "For even the Son of Man came not to be ministered unto, but to minister, and to give his life a ransom for many." And so Jesus here, the Son of Man, at his first coming, he came not to be ministered unto, but to minister. He came as a servant. A minister is someone who serves, someone who does work for someone else. You know, when you think of a minister, some people think of somebody who stands behind a pulpit. That's only because they are a minister for the work of the Lord. They are serving God in that. So Jesus came to be a minister. He came to be a servant at his first coming. Now, I think it's pretty clear that I believe that the servant here is Jesus. Now, I think that all that Scripture gives a pretty good case for Jesus being this servant here in Isaiah chapter 42. But I said not only that I think that, that I have my thought on it, but I think there should be no debate as to who this servant is. I don't think it's a matter of what I think or what I believe. While I do think those Scriptures make a good case, let's look at Matthew chapter 12, verses 17 through 21. Matthew chapter 12, verses 17 through 21. And I want you to see what Jesus says here. Matthew 12, 17 through 21. He says, "That it might be fulfilled which was spoken by Isaiah the prophet, saying, Behold my servant whom I have chosen, my beloved in whom my soul is well pleased. I will put my spirit upon him, and he shall show judgment to the Gentiles. He shall not strive nor cry, neither shall any man hear his voice in the streets. A bruised reed shall he not break, and smoking flax shall he not quench, till he send forth judgment unto victory, and in his name shall the Gentiles trust." So look back and reread Isaiah chapter 42, verses 1 through 4. "Behold my servant in whom I uphold, mine elect, in whom my soul delighteth. I have put my spirit upon him. He shall bring forth judgment to the Gentiles. He shall not cry, nor lift up, nor cause his voice to be heard in the street. A bruised reed shall not he break, and the smoking flax shall he not quench. He shall bring forth judgment unto truth. He shall not fail, nor be discouraged, till he have set judgment in the earth, and the isles shall wait for his law." Jesus here quoting part of Isaiah chapter 42 in these first few verses, making it clear that he is the servant here, that it's not the nation of Israel that is to bring forth judgment to the world, that it is God. He's referenced here as God's servant. "Behold my servant whom I uphold." And while Jesus is the second person of the Trinity, is the servant of the Father, all three parts of the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, are God. God is one with three persons, three wills, three centers of will, three personages, one God. God himself is the only one who can set the world right. And so now we look at verse 5. I hope that that's clear. I hope that we understand that the servant here in chapter 42 is not Israel. It is Jesus. Verse 5, "Thus saith God the Lord, He that created the heavens and stretched them out, He that spread forth the earth, and that which cometh out of it, and He that giveth breath unto the people upon it, and spirit to them that walk therein." And here we're given a reminder of who God is and what He's done, and why He has authority. It says, "I, the Lord, have called thee in righteousness, and will hold thine hand, and will keep thee, and give thee for a covenant of the people, for a light of the Gentiles." And so here, another reason why people get confused. In verse 5, there's a change. There's a change of subject. And that change in subject begins to address Israel here. And it says in verse 6, I, the Lord, have called thee in righteousness, and will hold thine hand, and will keep thee, and give thee for a covenant of the people, for a light of the Gentiles. So here we see that Israel is given for a light of the Gentiles. We know that from basically all of our studies through the minor prophets, all of our studies where we've went anywhere into the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and you see that God called Abraham, and he called Abraham to be the father of a nation that was supposed to be the light to the world, a nation that failed in that multiple times, a nation that will one day have the opportunity to fulfill that mission given to them by God in the tribulation period, and then throughout the millennial reign, and then I believe throughout the eternal kingdom. They will represent that. And so says in verse 7, to open the blind eyes, to bring out the prisoners from the prison, and them that sit in darkness out of the prison house. And so, that's what they were supposed to do. They were supposed to be a light. You can't escape darkness without light. And so he provides a light to the world. It says to open the blind eyes. If you're in total darkness, your eyes are just as good as blind. It says, and them that sit in darkness out of the prison house. And so that's what the idea is. They were supposed to be representatives, and they were supposed to bring people to the light. They were supposed to bring people to God. They were supposed to bring people away from darkness, out of the prison house, out of sin, and into right relationship and fellowship with God. It says in verse 8, I am the Lord, that is my name. I am the Lord, that is my name. He says, and my glory will I not give to another, neither my praise to graven images. God says, I'll be with you. He says in verse 6, I'll keep thee and give thee for a covenant of the people. But he says in verse 8, remember, I am the Lord. He says, and my glory will I not give to another, neither my praise to graven images. And so he will not accept idols. He will not accept false gods. He will not accept idolatry committed on the part of human beings. He will not tolerate that. And so we'll move on to verse 9. It says, behold, the former things are come to pass, and new things do I declare. Before they spring forth, I tell you of them. And so he says, very clearly, this is something that hasn't happened yet. He says, former things are come to pass. He says, the past is the past. He says, new things do I declare. He says, this is the future. He says, before they spring forth, I tell you of them. So he says in verse 10, sing unto the Lord a new song, and his praise from the end of the earth, that ye go down to the sea and all that is therein, the isles and the inhabitants thereof. Let the wilderness and the cities thereof lift up their voice. The villages that Kedar doth inhabit, let the inhabitants of the rock sing. Let them shout from the top of the mountains. Let them give glory unto the Lord and declare his praise in the islands. It says, the Lord shall go forth as a mighty man. He shall stir up jealousy like a man of war. He shall cry, yea, roar. He shall prevail against his enemies. And so he says, I'm telling you of something in the future. And immediately after he says that, he says, sing unto the Lord a new song. And while I believe that, and I've seen this verse and this collection of verses referenced multiple times by multiple preachers in multiple sermons about how we are to give glory to God through song, about how we are to raise our voices, and usually this is given in tandem with different verses from the Psalms. If you look at the context here, it says this is something that is going to happen in the future. He says, sing, sing, sing. He says, let them, in verse 12, let them give glory unto the earth and declare his praise in the islands. And what's the bookend on this? The Lord shall go forth as a mighty man. He shall stir up jealousy like a man of war. He shall cry, yea, roar. He shall prevail against his enemies. This particular section here, I believe the doctrinal application is to the return of Jesus at his second coming. And the songs that will emanate from his servants at that time, that really will be a new song. There will never have been a song like it, because nothing will have ever occurred on earth like that event before. And they will sing of the glory of God like he's never shown it before. And so, yes, I do believe that as Christians we are to sing a new song. I believe we are to be praising God. I believe in psalms and hymns. I believe we are called in the Psalms to be able to use musical instruments in that. I don't believe, like some other churches might believe, that you can't use musical instruments. I don't believe that there is any scriptural reason why you can't use a musical instrument in the praising of God. He commands it of the Jewish people in the Psalms. So I don't believe there's anything evil about that. I believe that you can go bad places anytime you introduce music of any kind anywhere. Music, and this is something that most younger generations don't understand. They don't understand the power of sound. They don't understand how sound interacts with our bodies, how it interacts with our eardrums, and how that goes through our nervous system and into our brain, and how that responds back to the rest of our body, and how, whether we know it or not, whether they're conscious or subconscious, we begin to feel urges based on sounds or patterns of sounds. It's the same as the things that you're looking at. You know, if you look at very stimulating images, whether those be food, or whether it be violence, or whether it be things that are sexual in nature, your body will receive that information, and it will take it into your brain, and your brain will send stimuli back to other parts of your body. If it's food, typically those nervous signals get sent down into your chest and into your stomach area. You begin to maybe feel hunger based on the images that you're seeing. And so natural sensory information, nothing necessarily wrong about information in and of itself, but you can take in information that's not good for your body, and that can be visual or it could be audible. So that's very true. So there is a danger with music, but if you are worshiping God in spirit and in truth, there's no danger at all. So I think that people will take things that they understand to be true and then extrapolate on Scripture where they shouldn't, and come up with ideas that are actually anti-scriptural. Because again, people in the Bible have been commanded to use musical instruments when praising the Lord. That doesn't mean every time you praise the Lord you have to play an instrument. It doesn't mean that every single person on earth is duty-bound to learn how to play an instrument. If that's the case, then I've already failed, and the Lord needs to take me home right now, because I can't play anything. I'm tone deaf. I can't move my fingers well enough to work a piano or a stringed instrument. The best I could do is maybe a kazoo. We just, we all have different things that the Lord calls us to. I don't believe I'm musically talented or gifted. I think that's just not something that He's blessed me with. I think that I'm still called to sing a new song. I'm not going to be the writer of that song as far as I know. I'm not going to compose the melody or compose the lyrics, but I can participate in the praising of the Lord. So, that being said, that's more, like I said, the kind of the spiritual or devotional application of these verses, but the doctrinal application, it is the song that will be sung upon Jesus' return. And he says in verse 13, the Lord shall go forth as a mighty man. He shall stir up jealousy like a man of war. He shall cry, yea, roar. He shall prevail against his enemies. When Jesus comes back the second time, it's going to be different than the first time. It's going to be very different than the first time. We can see here, and we'll just look at this. We'll compare these next few verses to some of the verses from the earlier chapters, or from the earlier part of this chapter. It says, I have long time holden my peace. I have been still and refrained myself. Now will I cry like a travailing woman. I will destroy and devour at once. God says, and again, this is something that's to be, this is one of the new things he's declaring. This is something that he's telling them before it springs forth. He's telling them before it's happened. And we're reading it still before it's happened. He says that he's holding his peace and been still and refrained himself. Not only is he refraining himself from this throughout the entirety of the church age period, where people are supposed to be serving God and serving the Lord and believing in Jesus and converting other people to belief in Jesus and sharing the knowledge of the gospel and sharing the joy and sharing the idea of salvation with people so that more people can get into heaven. During that whole time period when people are miserably failing at that over the past 2,000 years, and I mean miserably failing, because if it's not at least a 50% split on earth, if there are more people who are not Christians than who are Christians, it's failing. And God isn't failing, but his servants are. So, if we can't even get half, and I don't just mean we in this room. I know there's only so much that one person can do. But that still applies individually to each and every one of us. If one person, if you could imagine one person, one Christian, leading one person to Christ every year, and then each of those leads one more person to Christ every year, and each of those leads one more person to Christ, just in a 365 days time span. That's all. You just got one person. And if everybody could do that, the world would be overtaken by the blood of Christ in the context of history and in the amount of time we've been around. It'd be like the twinkling of an eye. It'd be like the snap of a finger. It would be so quick. But we inhabit these fleshy bodies, and we still have that sin nature in this flesh. And we are not perfect beings. We are saved and redeemed, but we are not perfect. Not yet. God will make us whole. He will restore us. And so we will fail. We will let him down in ways that he cannot and will not let us down. And that's something we have to reckon with and something that we have to improve on. That should be the goal. Constant improvement. Constant improvement. Because if you're not improving for God, if you're not getting closer to him, you're going the other way. You're not staying stagnant. That doesn't exist. I don't care what you're talking about. I don't care whether you're talking about sports or whether you're talking about academics. If you aren't getting better at something, you aren't just staying the same either. That does not exist. Your body's aging, your mind is aging, your brain is aging. If you aren't doing something to improve, slowly but surely, you're decaying and you're getting worse. So it says here in verse 15, after he concluded verse 14 with, I will destroy and devour at once, he says in verse 15, I will make waste mountains and hills and dry up all their herbs, and I will make the rivers islands and will dry up the pools. Now compare this to what God's servant is supposed to do at the beginning of this chapter. Beginning in verse 2, he shall not cry, nor lift up, nor cause his voice to be heard in the street. A bruised reed shall he not break, and the smoking flax shall he not quench. He shall bring forth judgment unto truth. That was Jesus at his first coming. He did go into the temple and cleanse the temple from the filthy, putrid sin that was infecting it, the money changers, and the commercialization of God's temple. He did that. But any time in his ministry, he never had to make a sales pitch. He never went about destroying the landscape everywhere he went as he walked through. He did not come through marching into battle. He came through meek and lowly. That was what he did at his first coming. I was looking, it looks like what? You're 123, Ron, on questioning like Jesus? Is that how far you are now? 123 weeks? Just finished. 123 weeks of time that we've spent learning about the life of Jesus from the Gospels. I hope everybody here knows how Jesus lived his life after 123 weeks of understanding this. And look at that and compare all of that and juxtapose that to these verses here in verses 14 and 15. I have long time holden my peace. I have been still and refrained myself. Now will I cry like a travailing woman. I will destroy and devour at once. I will make waste mountains and hills and dry up all their herbs, and I will make the rivers islands, and I will dry up the pools. How different. This is the same God. This is the same person. And how differently his plan, it boggles my mind, how he is accomplishing something in one way at his first coming, and he can accomplish salvation that way at the first coming, and he can accomplish salvation another way at his second coming. And while they might be different kinds of salvation, one is spiritual salvation, another one is physical and political. But there is that element of spiritual still there, because people will come to him, they will see him. So he says in verse 16, and I will bring the blind by a way that they knew not. I will lead them in paths that they have not known. I will make darkness light before them and crooked things straight. These things will I do unto them and not forsake them. And so I believe this is a description of those saints who will be alive at the end of the tribulation period. He's going to lead them out of that darkness. And here's another group of people that are going to be affected by this. It says, they shall be turned back, they shall be greatly ashamed that trust in graven images, that say to the molten images, ye are our gods. And so, if you could imagine, some of you may be familiar with the habits and the acts of some crazy dictators. People like Joseph Stalin, like Pol Pot. Currently, we're familiar with Kim Jong-un in North Korea. These people who, once they get in control, once they seize power, they want to be the center of the entire nation. They want to be the center of attention. They want to be the center of everybody's life. They force people to put pictures of them in their houses. And if you don't have a picture of the great almighty leader in your household, you can be arrested and tried and sentenced. You have to have that in your house. I can only imagine the insanity that the Antichrist will perpetrate whenever he's ruling. We all know that people are going to have the mark of the beast in order to partake in the world economic system. What other crazy laws is he going to come up with where he makes them keep images and whether they be molten or graven in their households? And you might think, well, how in the world would everybody in the world, how would he get everybody in the world to do that? How would people who know at least an inkling of the Bible that God doesn't like idols, how would they be able to follow the Antichrist and believe he's God, if he's having them keep some kind of idol. Well, I can tell you there's about 1 billion people on earth, give or take, that so supposedly believe in the God of the Bible, but they keep an idol in their home, or they carry it on them, or they put it in their car. And they either have a saint's medal, or they have a rosary bead, or they have a crucifix on their wall. They have these religious items that are supposed to bring them into contact with God, or bring memory of God into their life. And when you put an image of Jesus upon the cross, which is what a crucifix is, he's still on the cross. That's not where he's at now. And if you have that and you kneel down and pray to that, you're not praying to God. You're praying to that piece of wood or piece of metal, whatever it's made out of. Whenever you hold a medal in your hand, like a St. Christopher's medal or whatever it may be, and you hold that and you pray to some saint in the sky, you're not praying to God. You're praying to that object. When you have those rosary beads and you go through them, and they're meant, I know all the reasons why they exist. I know what they're supposed to represent. And I'm not saying every Roman Catholic church member who carries a rosary bead is committing idolatry. I don't think that every single one is. But if you can't pray without those rosary beads as a Roman Catholic, you're praying to the rosary beads, not to God. So, if you want to know how people can supposedly believe in God and also have, because the Antichrist is going to claim to be God. He's going to claim to be the God of this book. But people are going to believe it. Even though there's obvious contradictions, even though it should be plain, they're still going to believe it. And if you can see how 1 billion people, or close to 1 billion, give or take, that's about how many people the Roman Catholic Church has as official members. There might be more, there might be somewhat less. Those numbers may not be accurate. But a fair number of people who can carry around idols with them all the time and not have the recognition of it. How easy will it be for the Antichrist to do that whenever the delusion is sent upon people to believe in his lies? Very easy. So, if you want to know how molten and graven images could seep into that tribulation period, that's how. So it says, "Hear ye deaf," in verse 18, "Hear ye deaf, and look ye blind, that ye may see. Who is blind but my servant, or deaf as my messenger that I sent? Who is blind as he that is perfect, and blind as the Lord's servant?" And we know that Jesus was not physically blind. He could see. We know that he is not going to be physically blind. He can see. So what does this mean? What does this mean? His actions are based on justice and truth. And he will do exactly what is right, no matter what's in front of him, no matter who's in front of him, no matter what he hears, no matter what anybody says. That's why it says, "Who is blind but my servant, or deaf as my messenger that I sent?" A lot of times you'll see when in depictions of justice, you see the woman holding up the balance. She's got the blindfold on because justice is supposed to be blind. It's not supposed to matter who. It's supposed to matter, is this balance in balance or is it not? We're not gonna deal with any favoritism. We're not gonna deal with any respect of persons. Do you have the blood of Christ or not? Are you one of his or are you not? That's the question. It's not how many good deeds did you do in your life. It's not how many bad deeds did you do in your life. It's got nothing to do with whether you're a good person or a bad person. It's, have you trusted in him? He can turn you into what he wants to turn you into once you do that. Have you trusted in him? That's the question. That's going to be the same question at the end of the tribulation period. It's going to be the question at the rapture. Are you or are you not a Christian? Are you or are you not a person whose blood or who has had the blood of Christ applied to your soul, applied to your life? Are you or are you not saved? That is the question. If you are not, you are on a bad road. You are not on the straight and narrow. That's the only road that leads to the straight gate. That's the only road that leads into the heaven, is on the straight and narrow path. So, examine that. It says in verse 20, "Seeing many things, but thou observest not, opening the ears, but he heareth not. The Lord is well pleased for his righteousness' sake. He will magnify the law and make it honorable." He says, "But this is a people robbed and spoiled. They are all of them snared in holes, and they are hid in prison houses. They are for a prey, and none delivereth, for a spoil, and none saith, Restore." He says, "Who among you will give ear for this, to this? Who will hearken and hear for the time to come?" He says, "Who gave Jacob for a spoil, and Israel to the robbers? Did not the Lord, he against whom we have sinned? For they would not walk in his ways, neither were they obedient unto his law." And so Isaiah says here, are you going to pay attention, people? Are you going to listen to what the Lord had to say here? He says, "Therefore he hath poured upon him the fury of his anger and the strength of battle, and it hath set him on fire round about, yet he knew not, and it burned him, yet he laid it not to heart." And so that's what Israel went through. They didn't understand their judgment. The 10 northern tribes, they didn't understand their judgment. They did not heed the prophets. And upon being taken captive by the Babylonians, when Judah was conquered, they didn't really understand it either. Why? They didn't listen to Jeremiah. They didn't listen to what Isaiah had to say before him. They didn't listen to their prophets. They didn't listen to the minor prophets. They didn't listen to anybody. They wanted to follow after their own lusts of their flesh. And so they were burned. And so what we've seen here, we see that Jesus is the servant of God. We see that he is the one who will bring all these changes. We see that he came once and he's going to come again. And we see that judgment is on its way, that there is not... He already came in peace and in meek and lowliness. Next time he comes, it's going to be as a mighty man of war. And so Israel has failed. And Judah is failing. And all you have to do is look at the history and the time period of when this has happened. All you have to do is just look through that. And we studied through Hezekiah in pretty good detail. Look at toward the end of his life, what was going on. Look at what his son did. Look at what his grandson did. Look at what all the kings after them did. And you'll see why judgment was on its way. And if you look at the world today and see all the evil being perpetrated in it, you can see why judgment is on its way. So, that is Isaiah chapter 42. Any quick comments or questions this morning?